My grandfather was a doctor who had seen his fair share of pandemics, but there's one outbreak that still haunts me to this day, the one that could have been caused by something as mundane as a fungus. It started with a series of unexplained deaths in a small town in Africa. The victims all had one thing in common. They had recently visited a local market where bat guano was sold as a supposed health tonic. My grandfather was called in to investigate, and what he found shocked him. The victims' lungs were filled with tiny, thread-like structures that looked nothing like any virus he'd ever seen before. As I grew older, my grandfather would sometimes tell me about this case, but only in passing. He'd say something like, "And then there was the fungus, dear, and leave it at that." But one thing always stuck with me. He mentioned that the fungus had been found in a cave system deep in the African forest, where the local people would sometimes venture to collect guano. I remember thinking at the time, what's so special about this fungus? And my grandfather would just smile and say, "You'll see, but I didn't know it yet." But that conversation would change everything when I stumbled upon an old research paper in our attic. It was from the 1970 and detailed a study on the effects of a certain type of fungus on the human body. The paper claimed that this fungus could produce toxins that were so potent, they could cause respiratory failure within hours. And what caught my eye was the fact that the researchers had found evidence of this fungus in several other outbreaks throughout history, including one that had occurred over 1000 years ago in ancient China. I couldn't believe it. A single type of fungus might have been responsible for some of the deadliest pandemics in human history. But here's the part that really threw me. My grandfather had mentioned that the fungus was often found in caves and bat guano. And as I read on, I realized that these were the exact same conditions under which many other types of fungi would thrive. It made me wonder if this fungus wasn't just a coincidence, but rather a symptom of something far more sinister, our relationship with nature. As I dug deeper, I found that modern society has become so focused on eradicating pests and diseases that we've lost sight of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. We've created an environment where fungi like this one can thrive, often with devastating consequences. And what really got me was when I read about a recent study that suggested this very fungus might be present in some of our most polluted cities right here at home. It's still hard for me to wrap my head around the idea that something as simple as a fungus could have caused so much suffering over the centuries. But now that I know, I can see it everywhere. In the way we dispose of waste, in the chemicals we use to kill pests, and even in our diets, which often rely on foods treated with fungicides. I still don't know if I'd do what my grandfather did all those years ago. But one thing is certain, I'll never look at a bag of guano or a fungus the same way again. And that's not just because it could have caused a pandemic, but because it forces us to confront the fragility and beauty of life itself. It wasn't until I started researching more about this fungus, known as Ophiocordicep unilateralis, that I realized just how closely tied its fate is to ours. The fungus infects ants, manipulating their behavior until they climb to high ground and bite onto a leaf, before producing spores that can spread the infection further. But here's the thing. Our modern world has created an ideal breeding ground for this fungus, with climate change bringing warmer temperatures and drought, leaving dead trees and decaying vegetation in its wake. As I dug deeper, I found that many of the symptoms described during the 17th century European outbreaks were eerily similar to what we see today with fungal infections. The devil's grip, they called it back, then a painful and crippling illness that seemed to strike without warning. Some historians have even suggested that the fungus might have been present in the Great Fire of London, which ravaged the city in 1666. The more I read about this fungus, the more I began to see the world through its lens. We're constantly talking about how modern medicine has saved us from the worst diseases. But what if it's not just viruses we should be worried about? What if our entire approach to health and wellness is off-kilter because of one tiny detail like a fungus that thrives in conditions we think are just normal? It took me weeks to find anyone willing to speak with me on record about this. Most experts I contacted dismissed it as speculation or laughed it off. But one scientist in particular stood out. Dr. Maria Rodriguez has spent years studying the impact of environmental factors on human health and was more open than anyone else I spoke with. We've been so focused on finding a cure for the symptoms that we've neglected to look at the root cause, she said quietly over the phone. Her words hung in the air as I wondered what other secrets this fungus might be hiding. What if it's not just a curiosity of the past, but an ongoing threat, one that could strike again at any moment? And what would happen if we finally understood its true nature and power? As I delved deeper into Dr. Rodriguez's research, I began to understand the scope of the fungus's potential impact. It wasn't just a matter of it being a silent killer. The real issue was how easily it could adapt to our changing environment. This fungus has been around for millions of years, she explained, and its ability to evolve at an incredible rate is what makes it so terrifying. She told me about the fungus's unique property of forming symbiotic relationships with insects, which allowed it to spread rapidly across entire ecosystems. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing with fire, here tampering with forces we didn't fully comprehend. What if this fungus wasn't just a relic of the past, but an ancient force waiting for the right conditions to unleash its full fury? Dr. Rodriguez's words echoed in my mind. We've been so focused on finding a cure for the symptoms that we've neglected to look at the root cause. Was it possible that our very own environment was quietly incubating a threat of catastrophic proportions? I remembered a news report from the 1970 about a mysterious outbreak of fungal diseases in Africa, where entire villages were decimated by an unexplained illness. Could this be connected? And what if I had stumbled upon just one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that would eventually lead to an even darker truth? As I dug deeper into the research, I found a disturbing pattern. Every time humans had tampered with the natural world, creating new environments or disrupting ecosystems, they had inadvertently created breeding grounds for this particular fungus. It was as if we were cultivating a perfect storm of conditions that would bring about its resurgence. The more I read, the more I became convinced that Dr. Rodriguez's words were not just a metaphor. We truly were playing with fire, and the flames were getting closer to engulfing us. But what really chilled me to the bone was the realization that this fungus wasn't just some ancient relic. It had been present all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for its moment to strike. And when it did, it would be more than just a pandemic. It would be an extinction-level event. It was then that I stumbled upon a 1970 paper by a mycologist named Dr. Lee, who had been studying the very same fungus in a remote region of Papua New Guinea. He discovered that it wasn't just capable of infecting humans, but also animals, and not just any animals, but apex predators like tigers and elephants. The implications were staggering. If this fungus could take down the top of the food chain, what would be left to stop its spread? I spent hours poring over Dr. Lee's findings, searching for any clue as to how we might be connected to this fungus. And that's when I came across a small footnote, initially found in infected bat carcasses in an abandoned mine near the town of Las Conchas. The name meant nothing to me until I looked it up later that night. Las Conchas was just a few miles from where Dr. Rodriguez had worked on his research, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that there might be more to this connection than coincidence. The thought sent shivers down my spine. As I dug deeper into the mine's history, it had been abandoned since the 1950s, but not for lack of exploration or exploitation. In fact, it was during a period of rapid mining expansion in the region, with new veins being opened up almost monthly, and that's when I found it. A 1945 geological survey report detailing an extensive network of subterranean caverns and tunnels beneath the mine, carved out by the same companies who would later go on to develop Las Conchas into one of the world's largest gold mines. As I read through the dusty pages, a disturbing image began to form in my mind. A perfect symbiosis between humans and fungus, where our relentless pursuit of resources had unwittingly created an ideal environment for this killer fungus to thrive. And what if we weren't just dealing with an isolated incident? What if this was a symptom of something far more insidious, a ticking time bomb hidden deep within the very fabric of our ecosystem? It turned out that Las Conchas mine wasn't the only one with these subterranean caverns. And as I dug deeper, I discovered that similar networks existed beneath several other major mines in the region, all of them developed by the same mining conglomerates. The more I uncovered, the more it seemed like a deliberate oversight, or perhaps even a sinister intent to ignore the presence of this fungus in favor of maximizing profits. The questions swirled in my mind. How many other ecosystems had been silently compromised by our greed? And what would happen when this toxic alliance between humans and fungus finally came crashing down?